Hello again, it's Jess or JashiiCorrin, and today we're going to be having a look at some of the different ways you can set up a monthly habit tracker. A couple of weeks ago I had a video that showed how my personal habit tracking has evolved in my bullet journal, while today I wanted to have a look at a couple of the different setups or styles that you can use for your habit tracker. Before we jump in, as per usual, any of the equipment that I use to set up these habit trackers will be linked in the description box below. The first one we have is the horizontal habit tracker. This is the one that's most commonly used, or the one that you can probably find the most pictures of on Pinterest or Instagram. This style of habit tracker was very much popularized by Boho Berry. The general idea for this one is that you rotate your journal and write the habits that you want to try and keep track of on the left-hand side, and then the days of the month up the top. This style of habit tracker can be really useful for tracking large amounts of things. As you can see here, in this one that I've set up, there are 19 possible habits that you can keep track of. Depending on your own personal style and preference, you can leave this section blank, or you may choose to go and put in a full grid so it's a little bit easier to see each line for each habit and each column for each day. If you didn't have quite as many habits to track, you may choose to take up 2 lines for one individual habit, or just finish the tracker a little bit earlier and put something else down the bottom. Some typical things to put down there would be something like a steps tracker or a mood tracker, or potentially some other type of tracker that would show you what kind of things actually influence how many habits you do complete in every day. One of the biggest cons for this style of tracker is that you actually have to rotate your journal to fill it in. Although this is totally a first world problem, it does deter some people from actually filling it in, which is kind of the point of a habit tracker. Another style of habit tracker, which is less used but my personal favorite, is the vertical style habit tracker. So the idea for this one is that keeping your journal in its regular orientation, you write the days of the month down the side, and then you can list your habits along the top here. Depending on how much of a title space you want to use, you can write these habits out in full going up the page, or you can do what I do, which is just drawing individual small icons along the top here to represent each of the habits you want to try and complete. Again, as I spoke about for the horizontal tracker, you can leave this space open, or you can go and draw in a full grid, so it's a little bit easier to see where one day stops and the next day starts. With this style layout, you can technically track up to 25 habits. My personal preference for this one is actually writing down the days of the week as well as these numbers, and then using 2 columns for each of the habits I want to track, for a total of 12 different habits. The next style of habit tracker is one where each individual habit gets its own mini monthly calendar. As you can see here, I've drawn out a few different styles of mini monthly calendar that you might like to use if you set up this type of a tracker. 2 of the ways that are typically done by people who use this style is either the full grid style like we have in habit 6, or sometimes the numeric view like we have in habit 2. Sometimes people combine these and they use the grid with numbers in them. As you can see, we have some other possible ways you might want to do this though. So for instance, if you have a habit that can be broken up into multiple parts or sections, you may want to go and divide those boxes up into smaller parts. So for instance, this style in habit 9 here has each box broken up into 4 individual triangles, so it may be a habit that has 4 components that you might be tracking. If you're still okay with ruling but not quite as keen on it, you might try a layout like number 8, which has the top and bottom of each day ruled but not the sides. If you still wanted to enclose your calendar but were really quite against ruling, you could do something like habit 7 here, which has just the outline of the mini calendar. Or maybe even what we have in habit 4, where we've got the small dots for each corner of each box for each day. You could really jazz things up and do circles or even triangles for each of those boxes. And then of course you could just put small corners on each of the boxes instead of drawing out the full lines. The nice thing about this type of habit tracking is that it's very easy to see if there are any trends throughout the week. So for instance, if there's certain days where you're more likely to do a habit rather than others. However, depending on how many lines your calendar takes up for that month, you will only be able to track a smaller amount of habits. Another style of habit tracker we have is the circle style habit tracker. So this one has been becoming very popular on Instagram because once it is filled in, it does look very visually appealing. One of the cons for this one, however, is that circles aren't really the easiest thing to draw, so you do need to have either some kind of a stencil, a really steady hand, or if you can use one, a compass. The general idea is that every triangular segment of the circle represents one day, and then each concentric circle represents one habit. For this one, I've broken up every quarter of the circle into 9 days. So we have 9, 18, 27, and then up to 31 here. This means that there's actually enough room to write in what each of the habits would be for each of those concentric rings. If you prefer to use something like icons instead to illustrate what your habits were going to be, you could instead break each of those quarters up into 8. So that would be 8, 16, 24, and then 32. So it leaves one of those triangular sections to draw in those icons. As you can see, towards the center of the circle, things do get a little bit tight, so people typically don't choose to actually put any habits in maybe the first 2 rings. For the one that I've drawn here, you'd be able to track up to 7 different habits. A final style of habit tracker we have is similar to the circle, but maybe for people who aren't quite as comfortable using a compass. So for this style of habit tracker, instead of the circles, we have concentric squares, and then each section is divided up depending on how many days there are for the month. What I did for this one was that for every quarter of the square, we have 10 days associated with that. So you can see we have 10, 20, 30, and then 31 here. Again, depending on how you break this up, you can get your days a bit more spread out and have this go the entire way around your square. You could also make it so that instead of writing out your habits, you use icons, and you don't necessarily need to have this total section here. The total section, however, can be a really good way to see which habits you've actually completed well at the end of the month. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this video has given you guys some ideas on how you might be able to set up your next monthly habit tracker. If you had any thoughts, comments, or feels, please do leave them in the comments section below. I love reading what you guys have to say, and I'd love to hear about any habit trackers that you guys are particularly fond of. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to my channel to see the videos that I release every Thursday and Sunday. And until next time, bye!